A high turnout as millions of Tunisians go to the polls. The multi-party elections, a tangible benefit of successful revolution. What kind of government and what kind of constitution will emerge? And is this a template for the democratic process underway in neighbouring countries? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Mike Hanna. 9 months ago, Tunisians brought down the government of what they regarded as a repressive dictator, sparking a wave of anti-government uprisings in many parts of the Arab world. On Sunday, voters in Tunisia went to the polls to elect a constituent assembly that will write the country's new constitution. The revolutions are still underway in surrounding nations, but the hope is that this election will pass peacefully, providing another Tunisian model for the rest of the Arab world to follow. This is what some Tunisians had to say about the elections.
I'm very happy, a lot of emotions. It's a day that we never thought would come for a vote in Tunisia. There is nothing stronger than the feeling of voting. I passed my exams, I had children, but there is nothing as strong as that. To decide the future of your country, there is nothing better than that.
I am very, very proud of him, and we thank God he is a man who has changed the world, not just Tunisia. Tunisia is very precious to us. He is now the son of all the world, not just Tunisia. Thank God Tunisia has triumphed, and Libya has triumphed, and Egypt, and I hope to God all Arab countries who fight and sacrifice will triumph. We want victory for all nations.
Much of the debate surrounding the elections has focused on the Islamist party Ennahda. It was banned in the 80s by the former regime, but pre-election polls indicate it's likely to win the highest number of votes. Some of its rivals accuse Ennahda of wanting to impose Islamic law in Tunisia. The party's leaders, including its head, Yusra Ghannouchi, say they will respect the choice of all Tunisians, secular and religious, and insist there's no contradiction between Islamic faith and democracy. This is what Ennahda's leader had to say as he cast his vote on Sunday.
This is a historic day. Tunis was born again today. The Arab Spring was born again today. Not in a negative way of toppling dictators, but in a positive way of building democratic systems, a representative system which represents the people.
For more on this, I'm joined by our three guests. From the Tunisian capital of Tunis, Yusra Ghannouchi, member of the Ennahda party. From London, Ayesha Sabavala, economist at the Economist Intelligence Unit. And from Paris, Gardner, professor and chair of International and Comparative Politics at the American University of Paris. Welcome to you all. Let's begin in Tunis with Yusra Ghannouchi. And regardless of political affiliations, this is a very special occasion for all Tunisians, is it not?
Definitely. This is a historic day for all Tunisians, regardless of their affiliations. And there are wonderful scenes here, things to celebrate in Tunisia, around Tunisia, where Tunisian men and women, the elderly, young people, the disabled are all out there to make their voices heard. And that's what's important, whatever their choice is.
Well, Ayesha Sabavala in London, to continue with this a very, very special occasion. Indeed, one must just remember the months of struggle and the revolution that led to this particular point.
Yes, absolutely. I think the 9 months, who could have thought that a vegetable seller, and his self-immolation would lead to events of this nature? I mean, it's an election of many firsts, I would say. It's an election where, it's the first election in the aftermath of the Arab Spring. But it's also the first election when Tunisians will be going to the polls without knowing the outcome of the election. And I think that's quite important to note.
Well, Gardner, I think this is a very important point to stress. It is a long time that before Tunisians went to vote without knowing who's going to win.
Certainly. I visited Tunisia many times and just felt the tension in the air. You could feel it was a police state. Now it's open. The people are on the streets. I was there over the summer, and it's amazing what you can see on TV, the different television shows and caricatures of different political leaders throughout the world being joked about on television. Things are really, it's a really historic occasion, and we have to hope for the best that it turns out to go in the positive direction.
Well, Yusra Ghannouchi, some observers had said that one of the issues with this election campaign in particular has been that by necessity it hasn't focused on nuts and bolts of a normal election campaign, unemployment, jobs, the economy. It is very much and has been about the cultural identity of the society itself. Do you share this view?
I think the campaign has been on the whole positive, and as Nahda has tried to focus on its electoral program, which has published and is very detailed and deals with the political, economic, social and cultural fields. However, it has focused mainly on the priorities, on what shape of the future Tunisia, what it would look like, focusing particularly on the establishing a democratic system in Tunisia, and secondly, the priority of achieving a balanced economic development for all Tunisian regions. That's what Nahda tried to do. There were some campaigns that were still influenced by the old mentality of fear and rumors, rather than focusing on electoral political programs, and we hope that in the future this will change as we learn to accept each other and to practice democracy on the ground.
Well, Ayesha, Sabavala, this question of cultural identity, of defining what sort of a country Tunisians are, how much of a role has this played, do you believe, in the campaign?
Yes, I think because, the interim government so far and all the political parties have put political ideology and what their party signifies and what the main objectives are of those parties in political terms. That has definitely been the norm so far for all the political parties. I don't think there has been any party really, to be honest, in my opinion, that has presented a viable economic agenda for Tunisia going forward. Yes, there have been very top-line assumptions such as reducing the unemployment rate by X% in such and such year. But how is this going to be achieved? 2011 has been a bad year, to say in the least, for Tunisia. Economic output has been down. Foreign direct investment has been down. The tourism industry has taken a hit. We've got 700,000 unemployed Tunisians, with about 70,000 graduates coming on every year. This presents problems for the Tunisian economy going forward if the economy doesn't grow at a rate that's high enough to reduce the unemployment. And I can understand why political agenda has dominated so far, but I think that the National Constituent Assembly and the interim government that it appoints after today is going to have to divide its responsibilities between charting a constitutional agenda and trying to figure out how to reduce this high unemployment rate.
Well, Gardner, do you think that this is possible, the Constituent Assembly dealing with a number of issues within the Constitution, but also defining what the nature of Tunisia is going to be?
I think this is a very important question, and I think it's very important we look back historically to the whole vast history of Tunisia, going back to the Berber epoch, the Phoenician epoch, when Carthage was one of the great empires of the world, then the Roman conquest. But the point is, if you go all the way back to Carthage, you actually see that there were democratic elements in that senators elected the kings and that the consuls were elected by the people. If we go back far enough into Tunisian history, we can actually get a better, vaster vision of the country rather than going back to, say, the Arab conquest and the Ottoman periods, and then the French colonial period and the neo-colonial period of dictatorship. So my point is, I think it's very important for the Tunisians themselves to look over their vast history and to sort of see what was there in the past, and to take from the past and see what's still relevant for the present. And therefore I'm arguing that the democracy did have some roots in at least ancient Carthage, and that the Tunisians can look for the Western models, but also mold those Western models to Tunisian circumstances today. And I really think that philosophical debate, theoretical debate, even religious debate, has to be taken place, and then we can move forward to develop a new constitution and a new thing. So I think they're actually going in the right way here, but it's a long-term process. It's not going to happen overnight.
Well, Yusra Ghannouchi, that issue there, first of all, of Tunisians having a very rich history and also an experience of democracy in the past. The fact that the country now can build itself within its own image, not have it imposed either by a dictator or by the colonial outside forces. How critical is this, do you believe, as Tunisia moves forward?
This is, critical for Tunisia and for the region. And I'd like to add that, yes, Tunisia has a very rich heritage and history and culture. However, the reformist project of trying to establish an accountable, legitimate government that responds to the will of the people began in the 19th century, and it was in fact aborted by colonization and then with the post-colonial state, which continued, on an authoritarian system. We do not have to go all the way back to Carthage and other eras. Also, it is not true that the campaign and the priorities of Tunisians are now determining their identity or the various ideological discussions being provoked and focused on. In fact, if you look at the programs of the main parties and of most parties in Tunisia, of various backgrounds, leftists, liberal, Islamist, nationalists, all of them agree on Tunisia's cultural identity. No one is proposing any change to that. The priorities, in fact, and what Tunisia's main problem has been is not an identity problem. It's been dictatorship. It's been the denial of freedom, dignity for all Tunisians. And that is what the priority is now for all parties, to focus on establishing a real democratic system where all Tunisians are equal, where they enjoy their individual and public freedoms, where powers are separated and balanced, where there is independence of the judiciary, independence of the press, and I believe these are shared between all parties in these elections, and these have in fact been the objectives and demands of the revolution. And it's time for all these parties to avoid distracting our energies in these provoked ideological polarizations, and to focus on these priorities which are in fact shared.
Well, Ayesha Sabavala, I'd like to get your point of view on that. There's been much discussion, much debate about the role of religion within the democratization of Tunisia. Do you believe that this, as Yusra Ghannouchi has just argued, is detracting or diverting from the real process of what is happening here, or is it a very serious debate that needs to be addressed?
I do think that, well, because the Islamic, perhaps, identity and Islamic parties themselves were repressed under the old regime, it's not surprising that, Tunisians first and foremost will talk about the cultural identity and the political ideologies. And I think with a country that has been under this sort of system for the past 50 years, that's bound to happen. But I think, as I said, things need to move forward now. This new Tunisia needs to think about how to get out of the rut of unemployment, of the decline in tourism and the harm that's been done to the economy for the past 9 months because of the social unrest, to move past all of that and to put the economy back on track.
Well, Gardner, I just want to, we'll get on to the economy and what can be done in terms of developing the country, but I want to stick with that point that we have been discussing. To what extent did the debate about the religious nature of the parties contesting these polls, about the possibility or doubts of whether Islam can coexist with democracy, that type of debate, did that detract from the process or undercut the process, or was it part of it?
Well, first, let me say that I agree totally that democracy movements started in North Africa in the late 19th century, and that's really the forerunner of the movements today. However, my point was in going back to ancient Carthage was simply to show that that was an alternative to the Islamic period from 670 on, up to the Ottoman Empire, really, and therefore there's a richer dimension to Tunisian history and culture that needs to be explored. But I think, as was just pointed out, the fact that the Islamic parties were repressed in the post-colonial period means that issue has come back to the forefront. So having a very strong Islamic party, the Al-Nahda party, has raised the issue as to what that means and whether or not the two, whether you can drink tea and wine at the same table or not. And I mean, it gets to that kind of literal basis. And whether the two can coincide, I would argue they can coincide, but you have to develop a civil society that respects each different group, and I think that's part of the day. And that's why it's very important to go back into the culture and to begin to develop a dialogue among the Tunisians themselves that they can respect their different heritages and their different development, whether that's Berber and Arab, whether that's Islam and secular. You can go in different directions with that, man, woman as well.
Well, Yusra Ghannouchi, let me put that to you that we've just heard there from Hall Gardner. Is it possible for your party, which has an Islamist base, to coexist within a secular political system?
We believe there's no reason why it shouldn't. Nahda is a well-established and well-integrated part of Tunisian society. It's not a new party. It's existed for over 3 decades, and it's been part of the struggle against dictatorship, and it's proven its commitment to the struggle for democracy, for which it has sacrificed over 100 martyrs and tens of thousands of prisoners and exiles, alongside others from various trends who have suffered under dictatorship. Definitely I agree that Tunisia is diverse. It will always be diverse, and we believe that diversity is positive and is important. And we believe that regardless of these differences, as long as we're committed to democracy, to establishing this democratic system, we can work together. We do not have to agree, but we can respect our differences, especially in this transition period that is critical for Tunisia, and where the priorities are, I believe, something shared between all parties.
Well, Yusra Ghannouchi, just to stay with you there, you mentioned this transitional period that is coming up, a year in which the Constituent Assembly will very quickly nominate a president, nominate a government. Now, it would appear that this Constituent Assembly is going to have, by its very nature, to form a government of national consensus. Do you think that this is what is going to happen, that you are going to get this type of government emerging in the weeks ahead?
I believe that's what's necessary. That's what the people have been calling for. That's what our party has been saying since the revolution and before the revolution. And I believe that's possible. We need a national unity government that does not exclude anyone, that is broad-based and inclusive and includes parties from across the political spectrum and independents as well, who will contribute all to this very critical phase of our country, and there is no reason why this cannot happen.
Hall Gardner, do you believe that there is any reason why this should not happen, that a government of national consensus is possible over the next year?
I think it can happen. I think it also depends on the percentage that each party gets and what kind of alliances the parties find. I would also argue that the Al-Nahda party is, there's different Islamic groups, and there's signs that there may be some splits within that party. In fact, one of the leaders said that it was better that Islamist parties it was not in the interest of Tunisia for Islamist parties to rule, nor was it in the interest of the Islamic parties themselves. So I think if that's the general, if that's possibly a general consensus, then you'll have a divergence of parties, and this is perfectly normal, in which no particular political views will dominate, and the different sides will have to coexist and recognize their differences, find ways to make compromises, and move forward.
Ayesha, Sabavala in London, your view about this whole issue of a national consensus within the political system?
Yes, I think it is. I think it's definitely possible. It will depend on how big of a winner the Nahda party is. And I think what's also important is who the runner-up party will be, because you've got on the secular spectrum, you've got the Progressive Democratic Party, and you've also got the Itakatol and the Congress for the Republic. Now, the PDP regards the Nahda party as its main rival on the Islamic side, and on the secular side, of course, the Itakatol party is the main rival. Now, you could have, for example, if the Itakatol party tends to do very well, better than the PDP, you could have a coalition between, you could have a coalition between the Nahda party and the FDTL or the Itakatol. You could alternatively also have a coalition between the PDP and the Itakatol party, and you could have some sort of stabilizing secular force against the Nahda party. So there are various combinations that could emerge from the election. But what I think seems to be clear is that all the parties are going to have to coexist and form coalitions if they want their voices to be heard. And so I think there is going to have to be a consensus between the parties if they are to successfully keep to this one-year time frame, get a constitutional agenda together, and ensure that the parliamentary elections take place during the stipulated time period.
Well, Yusra Ghannouchi, Tunisia was the first country to launch its revolution, now the first country to hold a democratic election in the wake of that. Is there a consciousness that you are setting a trend, a consciousness that what is happening in Tunisia is absolutely vital for the rest of the region, which will be following suit in the weeks and months ahead?
There is, although the focus is on Tunisia, for Tunisians, they're focused on their own future. But there is a feeling of pride that just as they started this revolution that sparked a wave of change across the region in various forms. Again, Tunisia is setting a precedent in the Arab world and having the first real elections after the revolutions, and we hope it does provide an inspiring model for the rest of the region, also in terms of providing a model of coexistence and of diversity where all Tunisians, regardless of their intellectual and political backgrounds, can work together for the higher interests of the country. And I believe that would be very critical for the region as well.
Gardner, to pick up on this issue, Tunisia as a template for the rest of the region. In particular, Egypt will be shortly following with its elections as well. How important is it, this Tunisian process, as a model for what happens elsewhere?
Well, I think it's extremely important. If you look at the battles or the violence between the Copts and the Salafists in Egypt, it's going on behind the scenes now, and then the Muslim Brotherhood rising in Egypt and its relations with the Egyptian military. There are some real questions there that I hope Tunisia, because of its approach of tolerance and coexistence, can show a model for Egypt to settle down and begin to settle their differences. But the Tunisian revolution's affecting Syria, it's affecting Libya. You can even argue it's helped reforms in Jordan and Morocco and the monarchist states, and even affecting China. So it's really far-reaching and extremely important. And if the Tunisians get it right, they will really set the standard for a lot of transformations.
Well, they will set the standard for a lot of transformation, as is said, and one hopes that it will be a bar that is very high indeed in terms of a democratic process. On that note, my thanks to our guests, Yusra Ghannouchi, Ayesha Sabavala, and Gardner. And thank you so much for joining us here on this edition of Inside Story. We welcome your comments and suggestions. Please email them to us at insidestory@aljazeera.com. I'm Mike Hanna. Goodbye for now.